Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a massive question. What really kicked off World War I? Now, we all kind of think we know the answer, but the real story? Well, it's way more complex and honestly a lot more explosive than what you probably remember from history class.
So we were all taught that one single event lit the fuse, right? The assassination of an archduke. But hold on, how could one gunshot in Sarajevo possibly drag the entire world into the most brutal war humanity had ever seen? It doesn't quite add up.
And that's because it's wrong. The truth is, that assassination wasn't the cause, it was just the match. You see, the entire continent of Europe had become a giant powder keg, stuffed with explosive ingredients that had been building up for decades. All it needed was one tiny spark.
So what was actually in this powder keg? Well, it turns out you can remember the main ingredients with a pretty simple acronym, MAIN. That stands for militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. Let's break down what each of those really means.
Okay, first up, M for militarism.
And this wasn't just about countries having armies. Oh no. This was a full-blown, out-of-control arms race. All the major powers in Europe were trapped in this cycle of military one-upmanship, each trying to build a bigger, badder war machine than the next.
So at its heart, militarism wasn't just about policy, it was a cultural belief. It was this idea that true national greatness came from military power. And that created this really dangerous atmosphere, where going to war wasn't just a last resort. For a lot of people, it was seen as a necessary, even glorious thing to do.
And look, the numbers don't lie. In the years leading up to 1914, military spending just skyrocketed across Europe. These countries weren't just building for defense, they were gearing up for a major fight. Bigger battleships, massive armies. This constant competition bred deep suspicion and a dangerous use-it-or-lose-it attitude among the generals.
Next up, A for alliances. So you've got these huge modern armies just itching for a fight. But what made the whole situation even more volatile? All these powerful nations were tangled up in this incredibly complex and fragile web of promises to each other.
And the truly ironic thing is, these alliances were supposed to keep the peace. The whole idea was an attack on one is an attack on all, so nobody would dare start anything. But instead of creating security, it basically set up a continent-wide tripwire. One little local conflict could now instantly drag everybody into a massive war.
So by 1914, this system had split Europe clean in two. You had two massive armed camps staring each other down. On one side, you had the Triple Entente, that's Great Britain, France, and Russia. And facing off against them, you had the Triple Alliance, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. There was no middle ground. You were on one team or the other.
Okay, let's move on to I for imperialism, and you'll see how this all starts to connect. This intense competition wasn't just happening in Europe's backyard. It was a global scramble for colonies, for resources, for power, and it poured fuel on the rivalries back home.
For the big industrial powers in Europe, colonies were everything. They meant raw materials for their factories and new markets to sell their stuff. But it was more than just money. Having a big empire was the ultimate status symbol. And this global competition for land often pushed the major powers right to the brink of war with each other.
I mean, the scale of this was just mind-boggling. Get this. By 1914, European powers controlled a staggering 84% of the entire globe. This created a ton of friction, especially since newer powers like Germany felt like they'd missed out and were demanding their place in the sun.
And that brings us to our final and maybe the most powerful ingredient, N for nationalism. If the other factors were the fuel, this was the fire. This was a super intense and really dangerous kind of pride.
This wasn't just about loving your country. This was an aggressive belief that your country was fundamentally better than every other country. It created a really toxic us versus them mentality, where your own nation's interests were all that mattered, and any kind of compromise or diplomacy was seen as a sign of weakness.
The attitude of the time was basically, my country, right or wrong. You backed your nation, no questions asked. And it was this blind, fervent patriotism that convinced millions of young men that they should not only be willing, but actually eager to go fight and die for glory when the call finally came.
So now we can see the whole picture. The powder keg is packed to the brim. Militarism built the weapons. Alliances created the two opposing teams. Imperialism fueled the rivalry. And nationalism gave everyone the will to fight. It was a perfect storm, just sitting there, waiting for a spark. And this is the main takeaway. When that Serbian nationalist assassinated the Archduke Franz Ferdinand on June 28, 1914, that act did not cause World War I. It was simply the trigger. It was the match that finally lit the fuse on a bomb that Europe had been building for 50 years.
And after that, the dominoes just fell with terrifying speed. Once that fuse was lit, those tripwire alliances did exactly what they were designed to do. Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. That pulled in Serbia's ally Russia, which in turn pulled in Austria-Hungary's ally Germany. Germany's war plan meant they had to go after France, and their invasion of Belgium brought Great Britain into the fight. In just over a month, one regional crisis had exploded into a world war.
So you see, the Great War wasn't caused by one gunshot. It was caused by these four huge forces: militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism, all crashing into each other at the exact same time. It's a pretty heavy lesson from history, and it leaves us with one critical question. How are those same forces of Maine shaping the conflicts and tensions we see all around us today?